Welcome to this section on the insert cursor with ArcPy. An insert cursor in ArcPy is a Python object used for adding new rows to a table or feature class. The insert cursor provides a mechanism to programmatically insert a new row of data into a dataset. The capabilities of the insert cursor allow you to efficiently append records to a table or spatial features to a feature class. The insert cursor is particularly useful when you need to automate the creation of GIS data by adding new information to an existing dataset. Here we have an existing dataset with 4 fields and 3 records. When we use the insert cursor, we have a Python object that enables us to add a new record to our table. The insert cursor enables us to choose which information gets added. In other words, we do not have to cater for every field in the table. If a field has a default value set and we have not applied a value using the insert cursor, the default value will be used. The insert cursor enables you to override the default of a field if null is acceptable and supply a null value instead of a default value. We will be seeing this in action when we take a look at the explicit parameter with the insert cursor. This video provided a very brief introduction to the insert cursor with ArcPy. In the next video, we are going to walk through the Esri documentation for the insert cursor to provide us with a solid foundation before we go through more practical and technical exercises as we get to grips with mastering the insert cursor with ArcPy. In this video, we will walk and talk through the Esri documentation for the insert cursor. Here we are in the InsertCursor documentation for ArcGIS Pro 3.2. In the resources for this video, there's a text file containing the link to this URL. If you are using an alternate version of ArcGIS Pro, you can click on other versions. We have 3.0, 3.1 and 3.2, which is the latest. You can also go up to the URL and where it says latest, you could change this to 2.9 for example. Hit enter. And we can see that the ArcGIS 2.9 documentation has been archived and is no longer updated. We'll go back to the latest documentation. The insert cursor is a right cursor on a feature class or table. At its heart, the insert cursor can be used to add new rows to a feature class or table. If we are adding rows to a feature class, we can add the attributes and the geometry. There's some advice here that when using the insert cursor on a point feature class, that creating a point geometry and setting it to the shape at token is very expensive in comparison to just defining the point feature using tokens such as shape at XY, shape at Z and shape at M for examples. That using these tokens provides a faster, more efficient access to use the insert cursor to add new records. In this section, we will use point geometry and the shape at token, along with adding a point using the shape at XY token. There's a nice note here that using an insert cursor on a layer with a joined table is not supported. In other words, you cannot have a temporary join and then use an insert cursor. When we use the insert cursor and a field has a default value, a cursor automatically applies the default value when the field is not specified or is set to none. If the field is nullable, there is an optional parameter explicit that we'll be taking a look at that allows you to overwrite the default value and insert a null value instead of the default if nulls are allowed for that field. Here we have the syntax for the insert cursor. It is actually arcpy.da.insertCursor. I think it would be nice if Esri updated the documentation to include that. There are 2 required parameters, the in table and the field names. We also have 2 optional parameters in datum transformation and explicit. So let's take a look at each parameter. The in table is the feature class, layer, table or table view that you wish to insert a new record for. In our examples, we will be using feature class or layer. We then have the field names parameter, The field names can be a single field name or a list of field names as strings. We see that it can be a list or tuple of field names, and that for a single field you can use a string instead of a list of strings. You can also use an asterisk instead of a list in order to access all fields from the input table. Esri advises that for faster performance and reliable field order, it is recommended that the list of fields be narrowed to only those that are actually needed. We can use tokens to access additional information from the input table. We have a lot of geometry access here using shape at. We will be using the shape at XY token to update a point geometry. We will see the shape at token in action as well, and the shape at token always returns a geometry object for the feature. Moving on to our optional parameters, our first is datum transformation. Datum transformation is important if the geometry you are inserting has a different datum than the spatial reference of the feature class or layer that you are inserting the new record and geometry for. In one of our examples, we are going to take the geometry from a feature that is in Irish Grid, and we'll be inserting into a layer that uses Irish Transverse Mercator. In this instance, we require a datum transformation. We mentioned explicit earlier on. There's a nice description here that if a field has a default value and the field is nullable, using a value of true will explicitly override the default value and insert null values into the record. When using a value of false, the default value will be inserted instead of null, and false is the default. You can set explicit to equal true and apply to all fields, or you can supply in a list of booleans and individually select which fields you want to apply explicit to. The list of boolean values must be the same length as the list of fields supplied in the cursor. We can see here we have 3 fields, field 1, 2, 3, and we're using explicit equal to true, true, false. So there are 3 booleans in here to match onto the 3 fields in the field names. The insert cursor has one property, and that is the fields property, and it is a read-only property. The fields property returns a tuple of field names used by the cursor. And we can see here that the tuple will include all fields and tokens specified by the field names parameter. Further adding on to that, the order of the field names on the fields property will be the same as passed in with the field names parameter. So whatever order we pass in our fields with our insert cursor, the fields property will be the same order. There's one method associated with the insert cursor, and that is the insertRow, and it takes one parameter, row. This method allows us to insert a new row into a table. A little more information on the row parameter. It can be a list or tuple of values. This is important to note that the order of the values must be in the same order as specified when creating the cursor. The insertRow method returns a value that is an integer value, and this integer represents the new object ID for the new row created. In this section, in the InsertCursor section, we are going to individually assess all the parameters for the InsertCursor along with the property and the method. In this video, we walked through the Esri documentation for the InsertCursor. We know that the InsertCursor has 2 required parameters and 2 optional parameters. In the following videos, we are going to see each parameter in use in depth, and by the end of this section, we will be fully equipped to add new rows to a dataset using the InsertCursor. In this video, we will use the InsertCursor and supply in the 2 required parameters, an in table and a field name or field names. We will insert new features for a point layer and also a polygon layer. We are in the ArcPy Cursor's APRX, and I have this open from the previous section. The Python window is open. I'm going to right click and clear transcript. The Cellbridge Buildings attribute table is open. I'm going to right click on Cellbridge Points of Interest and also open the attribute table. We'll zoom in a little, make that a bit clearer. We'll first insert a new point into our Cellbridge points of interest layer. We can see there are currently 49 features in this layer. These are represented by the red dots in the map. We will create a tuple to store our F-class attribute and also our name attribute, and a third entry in the tuple will represent the X and Y of the point as a list. It could also be a tuple. In our Python window, we will create a variable called new POI for point of interest, and we'll set this equal to a tuple. Our F-class attribute is going to be monument, not monumenti, just monument. And the name of our monument is going to be Statue of Glen. And we'll give that an X and Y of 697412 for the X, and the Y 732885. And these are coordinates for the Irish transverse Mercator. This inner list could also be a tuple instead of a list. The documentation states that we will use a tuple when inserting a new row. Let's run that line of code, and we'll jump straight into our InsertCursor with ArcPy.da.InsertCursor. We select our Cellbridge points of interest, and we are going to supply in the F-class field along with the name field and the shape at token. This shape at token allows us to access the geometry for a feature. As we can see, the length of this list for the field names matches the length of our tuple for our new point of interest. Our monument is going to be our F-class, Statue of Glen will be name, and our coordinates will be our shape. We'll finish off this line of code with as cursor and the colon and hit enter, and we'll use the cursor insertRow method and supply in our new POI tuple. We'll hit enter and enter again. You can see we still have 49 records, but we've just added one, so it should be 50. I'll zoom out a little in this map and see if we can witness the point being added when we click refresh over here on the right. Did anyone see where it went? I did. It was this one right here. If I click on it, you can see Statue of Glen. I'll close the pop-up. We can also see that the number of records has increased to 50. And if I scroll down the attribute table, we can see the new record added. And there it is highlighted in the map. I'll zoom in a little. I'll clear that selection. Let's create a list that contains multiple tuples that we wish to add as new points of interest. We'll call this new POIS, set it equal to a list. In the resources section of this video, there is a text file that contains all the code being used. So to save me typing out all of this code and typing in the coordinates, I'm just going to copy and paste. I'll overwrite these square brackets and paste. Our first tuple represents an F-class of memorial and a name of St. Makua, followed by coordinates. Our second is attraction and Castletown Gates, followed by coordinates. And our third is also an attraction called Cellbridge Traffic Madness, because the junction in Cellbridge is atrocious for traffic. And we have a set of coordinates. We'll run this code. We will then set an insert cursor, so with ArcPy.da.InsertCursor, and we're adding in our Cellbridge points of interest. And again, we are using the F-class field along with the name, and we also need the shape at token to access and update the geometry. Well, access and insert the geometry. We'll be updating using the update cursor in the next section. Finish off with as cursor and the colon and hit enter. Now we create a for loop to go through our new POIS list. So for entry in our new POIS, we want to use the cursor.insertCursor method and supply in our entry. Before I hit enter, we note that there are 50 features currently in our layer. Let's run this now. Well, that makes sense, Glenn, isn't it? Because it is the insertRow and not the insertCursor. Apologies for that, folks. I do like to leave in these mistakes because programmers make these all the time and they're so simple. We'll now run the code. I'll zoom out in the map and see if we can see any populate. Now refresh the map. We have 3 new entries. I'll select these in our table. And we can see the 3 highlighted in the map. I'll clear that selection and I'm going to open up the Selbridge Buildings attribute table. Let's create a new building. Set this to equal a tuple. Again, I'm going to copy and paste to save wasting time typing. We're going to add in a name, a type, a rating, and also the coordinates to make up a polygon to add as our shape. Our name is Choi's Takeaway. The type is retail. We're giving it 5 stars because it's delicious. And then we have the 4 corners of the building. Now a polygon usually has the same first and last coordinates. ArcGIS Pro will automatically close the polygon. Hit enter. I will zoom in on the map where I know Choi's is going to go. We will now use with ArcPy.da.insertCursor. Supply in our Selbridge Buildings. We need to add the name, type, and rating fields, and also the shape at token. We finish off with as cursor and hit enter, and then we'll use the cursor.insertRow method and add in our new building. The new building is a tuple that matches the length of our input fields here. So name is going to be Choi's Takeaway and type will be retail with a rating of 5 and our polygon coordinates. We'll run the code. We have 25 features in this layer. We'll refresh the map and we can see it added in here. Close the pop-up and scroll down and we can see our new polygon has been added. In this video, we used the required parameters for an insert cursor to insert new records for a point and polygon layer. We saw that the tuple supplied to the insertRow method for the insert cursor needs to match the length of the fields supplied to the field names parameter for the cursor. This video will add some extra information when using the insert cursor on a point feature class. Throughout the geospatial forums, you will find many posts that show you that you can use a point geometry object and use the insert cursor to add a point. However, the Esri documentation states that creating a point geometry and setting the shape at token can be quite an expensive operation, and offers advice to use tokens such as shape at XY for more efficient access. In the previous video, we created a point using a list containing our X and Y coordinate and we used the shape at token. In this video, we will look at the alternate options. We are in the ArcPy Cursor's APRX. While it is not essential that you completed the video before this and performed the tasks, if you haven't, you might not see the added on features that we inserted. But if you're happy with that, continue. If not, go back to the previous video. I have the Python window open and this video is all about points. So we have the Selbridge Points of Interest layer attribute table open. In the previous video, we added a statue of Glen Point and provided in coordinates and then used the shape at token to insert. Let's clear this for now. And let's create a point geometry. Actually, let's just call this point for now. And we'll set that equal to ArcPy point. We're going to supply in our X and Y. I'll just pick a place on the map and get the X and Y. Let's go with 697, 213 and 732, 974. We'll run this line of code and we'll print the screen. We can see there's a point object. We will now create a point geometry. ArcPy.point geometry, and we'll add in our point. Let's print our point geom to screen. You can see we have a point geometry object. Now let's create a new point of interest, and we'll set that equal to a tuple. And we need our F class, so we'll set this as a memorial. I'll put the name as bad Guinness pores. So this is for all those bad pores of Guinness out there. And we'll set our geometry as our point geom. We'll click enter. We'll now use with ArcPy.da.InsertCursor. We'll select our celebrate points of interest, and we need to supply in the list of fields we are interested in, F class, name, and the shape at token. We then finish off with as cursor and the colon and hit enter. And now we want to call the cursor.insertRow method and supply in our new point of interest. We'll run the code. And if we look in around here and refresh the map, we should see our point appear. We also note we have 53 records or features, and that should update to 54. And we can see it added. We can click on it and we have the information in the pop-up. Esri do not recommend this option for inserting points into a point feature class. So let's take a look at what they do recommend. We'll close the pop-up. We'll go down to our Python window and we'll create a new point of interest. We'll pretend there's a new bank open in Selbridge and they've added an ATM. And Selbridge is so rich and affluent that it is the Bank of Selbridge. We now need to create a tuple with our coordinates. I'll find a place on the map and let's put in 697, 236 as the X and 733007 as the Y. We'll run the line of code for our new point of interest. And now we will use our insert cursor. This time, instead of using shape at, we're going to use shape at XY. We'll run the code. And let's refresh the map and watch the point populate. We can click. And we can see the details in the pop-up. I'll close the pop-up. And note we now have 55 features in our data set. If I scroll down the bottom, we can see our 2 new entries. I'll clear that selection. In this video, we saw a couple of alternate ways that you can use the insert cursor for point feature classes. Esri do not recommend using a point geometry and the shape at token, and advise using a tuple that contains the coordinates and using the shape at XY token instead. In this video, we will use the optional datum transformation parameter with the insert cursor. When features to be inserted have a different spatial reference than our target feature class, a projection is automatically applied. However, the projection can only be successful if the 2 spatial references have the same datum. If they have a different datum, a datum transformation needs to be applied. In the examples we are going to see here, we have one data set that is in Irish Grid, and we are going to insert features from our Irish Grid feature class into our Irish Transverse Mercator feature class. This means that we will need to apply a datum transformation. We are in the ArcPy Cursor's APRX. While it is not essential that you have followed any of the previous videos in this section and performed the tasks, Just note that the data that you see may be slightly different than what you are seeing. We have the Python window open, and in this video we are interested in the Selbridge buildings, so we have the attribute table open for that layer. If I scroll down the bottom, we have already added a new feature in a previous video. I'll clear that selection. I'm going to close the Selbridge points of interest attribute table. I'm going to right click on other Selbridge buildings and open the attribute table for that layer. We'll zoom in a bit. If I right click again on other Selbridge buildings and go to properties and into source, scroll down to spatial reference, I can see that this is in Irish National Grid with a WK ID of 29902. Click OK. And now for Selbridge buildings, I'll right click and go to properties, into the source tab and down to spatial reference. And we can see that this is the Irish Transverse Mercator with a WK ID of 2157. If you've seen the SearchCursor with spatial reference and datum transformation video, we saw when we printed out the JSON for a feature that we needed to apply a specific datum transformation in order to get the correct projection and coordinates when projecting from Irish Transverse Mercator to Irish Grid. We are going the opposite direction from Irish Grid to Irish Transverse Mercator, but we still need to apply a datum transformation. I'll click OK. We are going to take the geometry from the Beaufield Veterinary Centre, which you can see highlighted here, and use it to insert a new feature into our Selbridge buildings layer. Clear the selection and we'll go down to our Python window. We'll create a variable called geom, and here we are going to use list comprehension to return a geometry object. So we'll set geom to equal an empty list first. Then we'll define our statement. For row in ArcPy.da.SearchCursor, we'll supply in our other Selbridge buildings, and we are only interested in the shape at token. We want the geometry object returned, and we only want the record where the name field has an attribute equal to Beaufield Veterinary Centre. I'm going to copy that and paste it in. We need to wrap that in single quotes. Then we'll go back to the start of our statement and we will insert row 0. We are only interested in the geometry object returned from the shape at token. We run our code. We can print geom to screen and we can see it is a polygon object. I can also see that this polygon object is in a list. Always remember that list comprehension returns a list. Back here, I should have added an index after our list comprehension. So I'm going to do that now. Put in 0. We are only interested in the first element of the list returned. Now if I print geom, we can see it is not wrapped in a list. I can go geom.spatialReference.factory code, and we can see the identifying code for our geometry object. Let's create a new building variable. We'll set this to equal a tuple. We will add in our Beaufield Veterinary Centre, which will match onto our name field, and for our type we will set it as office. We're going to set it with a rating of 0 to start off with, and we'll supply in our geom. Hit enter. We need to get the datum transformation that we are going to apply. We'll create a variable called IG for Irish Grid, and we'll set this to equal ArcPy.spatialReference, and we'll supply in our 29902 ID and run that line of code. We then need the ITM, which is Irish Transverse Mercator. Again, we'll set that to equal ArcPy.spatialReference and supply in 2157 and run. And if we use the ArcPy.listTransformations function, supply in our Irish Grid as the first parameter and our ITM as the second, and run, we see a list of datum transformations that can be applied. I'm going to copy the first one here. We will now create our insert cursor with ArcPy.da.insertCursor. We select our Savage buildings and we supply a list of field names, name, type, rating, and you guessed it, our shape at token. We finish off the line of code with as cursor and our colon and hit enter. Then we'll use the cursor.insertRow method and supply in our new building variable. We'll run the code. I'll click into the Savage buildings attribute table. We currently have 26 records. When I refresh the map, that will update to 27. And when I refresh the map, this pink building here will turn black as it will have been added to the Savage buildings layer. So I'll refresh. And as you can see, that did not work. Our building actually popped up over here. Now this was actually done by design. I wanted to show you when I did not add the datum transformation what would happen. So let's go back down to our Python window, press up, and this time we are going to add in our datum transformation. I'll set that to equal what we copied. I'll rerun the code. Now look what happens when I refresh the map. Perfect. I hope that shows you how important it is to know if you need to apply a datum transformation when taking geometry from one feature class and inserting into another. In this video, we saw the importance of knowing if you need to apply a datum transformation when inserting new features to a feature class. In this video, we will look at using the optional explicit parameter with the insert cursor. The explicit parameter allows you to add a null value to override a default value set on a field, but only if that field is nullable, obviously. We are in the ArcPy Cursor's APRX. You do not have to have followed the previous videos in this section and completed the tasks, but it would be beneficial. Just to note, if you haven't, in our Savage buildings layer, we have 3 extra features. I'll just clear that selection. We have the Python window open and our Savage buildings and our other Savage buildings attribute tables. We are going to take 2 features from our other buildings layer and add them to our Savage buildings layer using the insert cursor. I'll clear that selection. In our Savage buildings layer, we can see we have a field called rating and it has a default of 0. So it automatically gets assigned a new value of 0 when any new record is added. We can see it is also nullable. We are going to use the optional explicit parameter for the insert cursor to overwrite the default value and set it as null. If you haven't watched the previous video on datum transformations, the other Savage buildings layer is in Irish Grid and our Savage buildings is Irish Transverse Mercator, so we need to perform a datum transformation when taking geometry from one to the other. Just to reinforce the transformation, we'll create a variable called IG for Irish Grid and we'll set this equal to ArcPy.spatialReference and add in 29902 and hit enter. We'll create one for our ITM, set this equal to ArcPy.spatialReference and feed in 2157. Now we get a list of transformations available, ArcPy.list transformations. Our from spatial reference is our Irish Grid and our to spatial reference is our ITM. We hit enter and we want to use the first one listed here. So we're going to copy. Let's grab our new building information using a search cursor. We'll set a variable called new building and we'll set this equal to an empty list. We're going to use list comprehension. We'll set our statement as for row in ArcPy.da.SearchCursor and we'll pick our other Savage buildings. We supply in the fields we are interested in, which are name, type, and our shape at token to get the geometry. List comprehension always returns a list, and we're only interested in the first element returned. We go back over to the beginning of our statement and we will set what we actually want returned in the list. We want row 0, that is our name. We want row 1, that is our type. We're also going to add a none in here. This is going to be our rating, and we're going to set a rating of none, which will translate to null when we use the update cursor. And we also want our geometry, so we need row 2. And we finish off with a closed bracket. We'll run that line of code. We now use our insert cursor. So with ArcPy.da.insertCursor, we add in our Selbridge buildings and we supply in our fields, name, type, rating, and of course our shape at token. We'll paste in our datum transformation and we're going to set explicit to equal true. This will allow us to insert our none value, which will be null, for our rating and not have it as the default 0. We'll finish off our statement with as cursor and the colon and hit enter, and we'll use the cursor.insertRow method and supply in our new building. I'm just about to hit enter on this, but I've realized I forgot to put in a where clause back in our search cursor. So I'm going to copy this so I don't have to write out all again. And I'm going to hit up and go back to our search cursor. And I need to add in a where clause where name is equal to DNG. This is the name of the building we want to add, and it needs to be wrapped in quotes. Now we have our new building. I'm going to print new building to screen. Perfect, we have 1. Now I'm going to paste back in the insert cursor and run. I'll pan the screen to where this building should have been added. Actually, the pan is going to refresh the map. I can see that it has. I'll do a proper refresh myself. We can see there's now 29 rows in our Selbridge buildings layer. This was the building that was added. And we can see there is a rating of null, indicating that the explicit worked. This should have been 0 by default. Close the pop-up. Okay, so we set explicit equals true. This means that the explicit override was true for every field that we added. Let's take a look where we can do it by just selecting the field of interest. We'll overwrite our new building variable. Go back to new building. We'll replace DNG with Vincent's and we'll run the code. We'll print new building to screen. Let's just navigate to Vincent's in the map before we run. Here it is here. We'll go back to our previous insert cursor, and instead of explicit equals true, we can add a list here. Now the length of the list has to match the length of the fields list. So we have 4 here in our fields list. For our name, we'll set false. We'll also set false for our type, but for our rating, we want to set true. And we'll also set false for our geometry. This means that explicit is only set for our third element, which is our rating field. We'll run the code. I'll refresh the map. We can see our new building added. If I click on it for the pop-up, we can see that the rating is null. I'll close the pop-up and we'll scroll down in our attribute table and we can see the 2 null values for our rating, even though there is a default of 0 set. In this video, we saw the optional explicit parameter for the insert cursor in action. The explicit parameter enabled us to insert a null value into a nullable field, even though there is a default value set for that field. This will be quite a short video showing how we can access the fields property for an insert cursor. We are in the ArcPy Cursors APRX, and you do not have to follow along with any tutorial throughout this section so far to be able to follow along with this one. We have our Python window open and we're mainly interested in the Selbridge buildings, so we have that attribute table open. We'll close the other Selbridge buildings table. Go down to our Python window and we will create an insert cursor with ArcPy.da.insertCursor. We'll select our Selbridge buildings, put in a comma, and we'll select the asterisk for all fields. We'll finish off with as cursor and hit enter. We'll now print the cursor.fields property to screen, and this will print all our fields from our Selbridge buildings. So we expect object ID, shape, name, type, rating, recommend, shape length, and shape area. We'll run and take a look. And that's exactly what we get. We can also run and get a selection of fields. So let's put in name and type, and we'll run once more. And we get the subset that we chose, name and type. And you're probably thinking, when will I ever need to print out these names? You might be getting errors and need to figure out if you have all the correct field names in a list. You might be generating reports based on SearchCursors, InsertCursors, along with UpdateCursors, and these field names could form the headings of a CSV output. With Python and ArcPy, you're only limited by your imagination. In this video, we took a look at the fields property that is associated with an insert cursor and saw that it prints out a tuple containing the field names that were used with the cursor. Throughout this section, we have been using the insertRow method for a cursor without talking much about it. In this video, we will learn a bit more about the insertRow method. We are in the ArcPy Cursor's APRX, and while you do not have to have followed any of the tutorials up until this point for this section, it is very beneficial. If you are jumping in right now, please note that there are 5 extra features in our Selbridge buildings layer than there are at the start of the course. I'll clear the selection. We have our Python window open and our Selbridge buildings attribute table. We are also going to right click on other Selbridge buildings and open the attribute table for that layer too. For our first example, we are going to get the name, type and geometry for the classic hair salon building. We'll create a variable called new building and we'll set this to equal a list. And we're going to use list comprehension along with the search cursor to get the information that we want. We'll set our statement for row in ArcPy.da.SearchCursor and we'll choose our other Selbridge buildings. And we are interested in the name field, the type field, and the shape at field to get the geometry. We also want to limit using the where clause. So we'll set name equal, let's just copy classic hair salon, copy and paste so there's no spelling mistake, and we wrap that in a single quotes. I can see I did not get my statement inside the square brackets. Let's sort that out. And list comprehension always returns a list, and we are only interested in the first element of that list returned. We will, however, set what we want returned in the list. It'll be another list. We want row 0, which is the name, row 1, which is the type. We'll add in a none, and this will represent our rating when using the insert cursor. And lastly, we are interested in row 2, which is the geometry, and we'll finish off with a closed bracket. We'll run that line of code and print the new building to screen. We can see we have a list object containing the name, type, none, and a polygon object. We will now run the insert cursor with ArcPy.da.InsertCursor. Select our Selbridge buildings. The fields we want are name, type, rating, and of course the shape at token for the geometry. If you've been following along this section, we know that the other Selbridge buildings is in Irish Grid, while the Selbridge buildings are in Irish Transverse Mercator projection system. so we need to perform a datum transformation. If you haven't watched the video on datum transformation for an insert cursor, please go back and watch it. For this example, I'm just going to copy in the datum transformation that was used in that video. We finish off the statement with as cursor and hit enter. I'm going to create a variable in here called OID, and we'll set this to equal our cursor.insertRow. And we'll add our new buildings to our insertRow method as a parameter. The insertRow method returns the object ID of the new row. I'm just going to zoom out on the map first. Now I'm going to run the code. I'm going to print OID to screen. We can see that it is 31. If I go into the Cellbridge Buildings attribute table, we currently only have 30. I'm going to refresh our map. And we can see we now have 31, and the classic hair salon has been added, and we can see it highlighted in the map there. I'll clear the selection. We will now perform a similar workflow, but this time for multiple buildings. Let's go back to our search cursor and the list comprehension. We'll update new building to new buildings because we are going to have multiple. And we will change our where clause to name in. And now we need parentheses. And we'll remove classic hair salon. Let's go to our other Cellbridge buildings and grab some names. We'll take Catherine's Sewing Services and paste. We'll also add in the Learning Lab, copy, paste. And lastly, we will add in Smoothies and Go, copy and paste. And this time we are not only interested in the first record that is returned because we have multiple features to return for. We run this code. Let's do a for loop through our new buildings. For building in new buildings, we will print each building to screen. We'll run, and we can see our 3 individual lists that were returned from our list comprehension. Each one contains the name, the type, rating, and the geometry object. Before I go any further, I forgot to mention one thing. We did use none for a rating in the last example, but we did not set explicit that we saw a couple of videos ago. So when we used the insert cursor, even though there was none set for the rating, if you go back into our Cellbridge buildings and look at our classic hair salon, we can see that the default 0 was set. This time we are going to use explicit and we're going to set the rating to null, and it will honor our none value here for our rating. We'll create a variable called OID list, and we'll set this to be an empty list. We're going to populate this with OIDs from our insert cursor. Let's go back to the last insert cursor we used, and we will set explicit to true. We'll remove everything under our cursor statement, and we'll put in a for loop for building in new buildings. We want to take our OID list and we want to append in what is returned from the cursor.insertRow method, where we supply in our building information. So let's look what's going to happen here. For each building in our new buildings, which are these 3 here, we're going to insert these into the Cellbridge buildings layer. And while inserting them, we are going to get the OID for each new feature in our Cellbridge buildings layer. Let's run our code. Now we have 31 records currently. When I refresh the map, we should see that jump to 34. It has indeed. We can scroll down and see the new entries. And notably, we now have a null rating for these 3 instead of the 0 that is default. Let's print our OID list to screen. We have the 3 that were just added, and let's look at doing something with these. We'll create an APRX variable, and this will be our current open project. So we'll use arcpy.mp.arcgis project and create an ArcGIS project object. We supply in current, which accesses the current APRX. Then create a variable called m, which will stand for map, and we'll set this to equal the ArcGIS project list maps function, where we supply in the name of our map, which is cursors map. List maps always returns a list, and we're only interested in the first map returned. Hit enter, and we can print m.name, and we should get the name of our map. We'll create a variable called buildings_layer, and we'll set this to equal our map object dot list layers function, and we'll supply in the name of our layer, which is Selbridge buildings. List layers always returns a list, and we're only interested in the first element of that list, which will be a layer object. If we print the buildings layer to screen, we'll see it is a layer object, and we can also get the name property to make sure we got the correct layer, and we have. Now we will use the layer object and the dot set selection set function and supply in our OID list. Now when we run this code, the 3 OIDs that were in our OID list will be selected. So we expect to see the bottom 3 features in our Selbridge buildings layer selected. So let's run the code. We can see we have the 3 selected. We can clear the selection by just running the set selection set on our layer object once more and supplying in no parameters. And the selection has been cleared. In this video, we took an in-depth look at the insertRow method for an insert cursor. We now know that the insertRow method returns an integer that represents the object ID for the new feature added to the feature class.